Hello everybody and welcome to Commodity Culture, where we break down the commodity space for both new and experienced investors. My name is Jesse Day. Before we dive in, standard disclaimer, nothing here is investing advice. Do your own due diligence. And today's guest is the CEO of First Phosphate, a mineral development company dedicated to extracting and purifying phosphate for the lithium iron phosphate battery industry. Mr. John Passalacqua, it's great to have you on.
Yeah, thank you, Jesse. Really nice to be on.
Yes, great to have you on. Phosphate is a commodity that is not often discussed, and I'm very fascinated to dive into it. But before we go there, I want to start, like I do with all new guests, with the origin story. So how did you discover the commodities and the battery metal space, and how did that eventually lead you to becoming the CEO of First Phosphate?
Yeah, thank you, Jesse. It's a really, really interesting story. If you'd asked me a year ago if I'd be here, I would have told you were absolutely insane. So it was just a confluence of events. So, I'm an investor. I have a family office, and at one point we were looking for investments in the potash or phosphate space. We went through looking for potash investments, couldn't find any for agriculture. Then we went into looking for phosphate for agriculture. Once we were in there, we found this shiny thing called the battery, and I just saw such an opportunity. It was just almost like scientific error, discovery through scientific error. So we saw that the lithium iron phosphate battery was going to be emerging. That there's going to be all kinds of supply issues with it, and we thought we could do a really good job. So we went in for fertilizer, came out with a battery.
Very interesting. And phosphate, as you mentioned, there also has an agricultural use that I want to get into. But first of all, I'd like to take a step back and look at the broad view of the macro picture for phosphate, starting with the simple question, what exactly is phosphate used for? What are its main uses?
So that's interesting, Jesse. To today's date, and probably will always be like this, phosphate is 90% used in agriculture and also in animal feeds. About 85% of phosphate is agriculture, and then about 5 to 7% is animal feeds. And then there's another 10% of really high purity uses of phosphate. That's when you start getting into industrial applications, of which you have the battery as well.
Could you give us an overview for the supply of phosphate? Which countries currently produce phosphate, and how is the supply chain set up?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I mean, almost 85% of the world's phosphate comes from Morocco. All the other countries in the world do have phosphate, but they're all depleting very quickly, and they've all hit peak phosphate. So it's about 10 to 30 years of phosphate left in all other countries of the world. And then you've got these massive reserves in Morocco that will be there for, decades and even, over 100 or more years. So, you've got peak phosphate in one area in all other countries of the world. And then you've got sort of, infinite, in a sense, reserves in Morocco. So it's sort of starting to develop like a real dependency on Morocco here over the next few decades.
So I'm very curious about lithium iron phosphate batteries. We often hear about lithium ion batteries. Could you maybe tell us what differentiates lithium iron phosphate from other battery types, and what the drivers on demand are there for the EV market?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Jesse. So, lithium iron phosphate is just another type of lithium ion battery. The lithium ion batteries that most of us know are the nickel, manganese, cobalt, that have lithium as a as a basis as well. But the lithium iron phosphate battery sort of kind of swaps out the nickel, manganese, and cobalt for the lithium, for the phosphate and the iron, but it still has lithium. The LFP batteries tend to have less use of lithium. Some say up to 50% less, but it depends on the manufacturer. So they're good in that kind of way. You can make more lithium iron phosphate batteries with the same amount of, with less amount of lithium, sometimes up to 50% less. And also, lithium iron phosphate batteries are the cathode active material, the powder, is much cheaper than the NMC battery, sometimes up to 50 to 66% cheaper. And they have much better fire safety. They have longer life, and also they're non-toxic. The NMC batteries have the advantage over LFP batteries in that they have a longer charge. But you see what the LFP battery is developing into. It's really developing into the battery of sort of, the middle class, the mass adoption battery, because they are cheaper, so you can get the price of the vehicles down lower, and they're also really good for city driving. If they can hold a charge up to 300 kilometers, you don't need more than that to go to work and to come back home in most cases. So you're going to see sort of the lithium iron phosphate batteries being sort of the middle class battery, the battery of mass adoption, sort of the battery of, sort of the inner city, if you will. Whereas the NMC batteries will remain the battery of, higher performance and, longer use driving. But both of them are very complementary together. LFP and NMC are just, like husband and wife, and they get along pretty good for the most part.
Right. So are we seeing on the commercial side, are we seeing more car manufacturers looking at lithium iron phosphate batteries? Is that something that you're seeing develop in the market at the moment?
Yeah, it's incredible what's happened. It's actually developed much further and much quicker than what we ever thought. For instance, all the manufacturers in North America, Europe and Asia have now moved apart, or much of their production onto LFP. Stellantis in Europe was a holdout. They announced LFP the other day. If you look at something like Tesla, wow, the Tesla models have now started to move to LFP, but also their whole a trucking division and sort of small commercial vehicles have gone completely over to LFP. So it's quite interesting what is starting to develop for the LFP battery.
And you mentioned the agricultural use earlier and how it's a different grade of phosphate that's used in the batteries. Could you maybe walk us through that and differentiate those different types of phosphate?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Jesse. So you got to kind of step back a little bit. And, phosphate world divides itself up into two types of rock. So there's a sedimentary rock, which is kind of like, brittle, kind of like old seabed, if you will. And then there's igneous rock, which is more of a volcanic type of rock. And you'll find phosphate in both of those types of rocks. The only difference is that 95% of the world's phosphate is in sedimentary rock, and then only 5% is in igneous rock. In that 95% sedimentary rock, you find a lot of impurities like uranium, cadmium, thorium, and a whole host of other heavy metals. So those kind of deposits are good for, a quick purification, a first level purification where you take out the heavy metals, and that creates, fertilizer grade phosphoric acid. It's called MGA, merchant grade phosphoric acid. And with merchant grade phosphoric acid, that's good enough for spreading on the fields because it doesn't have to have all of its impurities gone. And it can also go into animal feeds. But what is the 10% of uses out there, purified phosphoric acid? That's what's really important, because that's where you require a second and a third purification level. So for that, you can certainly get purified phosphoric acid from sedimentary deposit, but only a small quantity of the sedimentary deposit can be converted to purified phosphoric acid because the impurities are so high. When you use the igneous rock, which is only 5% of the world's phosphate, it's much cleaner. The one that we have in Quebec has got low amounts of sulfur, low amounts of trace elements. And so, almost 90% of that can be purified up to purified phosphoric acid. And that's a really important stat, because with a mine size that, is an eighth, a tenth of the size of a sedimentary mine, you can make the same amount of purified phosphoric acid, and you're not making much merchant grade acid for fertilizer. So it means that you can be focused on creating what I call, technological material. And that's why, we're sitting on igneous and orthosite rock, which is 1% of the world's purest form of phosphate in Quebec, and that allows us to make a large amount of purified phosphoric acid for the battery industry. So those are really the two types of rocks. 95% sedimentary, mostly for fertilizer, and then 5% igneous rock, which is the best for making really high purity applications such as the battery and other industrial uses. For instance, I don't know if you knew this, but purified phosphoric acid goes into Coca-Cola. So if you pick up a can of Coca-Cola, you'll find purified phosphoric acid. Sometimes you'll find it in paints. Sometimes you'll find it in fire extinguishers, pharmaceuticals, cosmetics. So that's really the really high purity use is purified phosphoric acid, and that's sort of the holy grail of it, right? And that's where we're going to have the really big pinch point. That's where the LFP battery is really going to occupy a large section of the demand. So people sometimes mistakenly think that it's going to compete with fertilizer, maybe a little bit in a sense, but it's really going to compete for purified phosphoric acid. And that's where we're going to find the pinch point. And that's where we're going to find, supply is going to be short and price might shoot up rather dramatically, sort of like, it has with lithium in the purified phosphoric acid space.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask next, actually, was about the price and perhaps the broader investment thesis for phosphate and the particular grade of phosphate you're speaking about. You mentioned a lot of very interesting drivers there for demand. How do you see the supply-demand fundamentals set up moving forward? And for somebody looking at the commodity space, why do you think phosphate presents such an attractive investment opportunity?
Yeah, so I think phosphate. It's tricky in that there's different grades of it, right? And it's very confusing. I think it's a fascinating commodity because not only is it food, but it's also technology. When you're looking at phosphate, you have to first understand the first level of purification is when you take it out of the mine, and it's either screened in the case of sedimentary deposit, or it's beneficiated, crushed, and separated in the case of igneous deposit like we have. So, and at that point you get what's called beneficiated phosphate rock, which is a phosphate that's sitting anywhere between 30 to 40% purity inside usually a host mineral called apatite. So, sedimentary deposit usually gets up to about 30% purity inside of apatite, but igneous rock can get up to about 40%. We get up to 40.25%, which is really important because the theoretical max of phosphate within apatite is 42%. So us getting up to 40.25% means one of the highest purities ever achieved. So that's beneficiated phosphate rock. Generally, that goes for the standard is Moroccan rock phosphate. So that's usually about $325, $350 USD a ton. It keeps going up, and then you get a premium obviously for the igneous rock because it's 40% phosphate. So you would just have to multiply that times 1.33 or whatever it is. So that's the first step of it. That's beneficiated phosphate rock. Okay, and then after that you're converting it into what is called merchant grade phosphoric acid. And merchant grade phosphoric acid trades on the market. I don't know where the pricing is at. Last I saw was around $1,000 US a ton. And then you go to a second step of purity from MGA, merchant grade acid, you go to purified phosphoric acid. Now this is where it becomes tricky because when you go to purified phosphoric acid, the market's a lot tighter. There isn't that many suppliers. There's only 4 suppliers in the Western world. Most of their stock is integrated, or they sell with these big offtake agreements to big companies. So it's really hard to get a pricing, but generally we found it, it's around 3,000, 3,500 USD per ton. For purified phosphoric acid, but if you ask for a quote, it might take a week before you get an answer. That's how clunky that kind of market is, and it's it's vertically integrated really amongst very few players. And then just so you understand, the merchant grade phosphoric acid that I was talking about earlier, that then goes into making all kinds of different fertilizers, whereas a purified phosphoric acid goes right into industrial application like cosmetics, fire extinguishers, Coca-Cola cans, LFP battery, electronics, pharma, a number of other uses.
Very interesting. Now, could you walk us through the mining methodology used to extract phosphate? Is this open pit operations? Is it underground mines? How exactly is it mined, generally speaking?
Yeah, excellent question. And this is where it's really important to understand that why phosphate is special. So phosphate trades by the ton. It's not like gold that trades by the gram. So you can move it easily. Phosphate is almost like a gravel, a little bit less, but you need proper logistics to move it. So having just a high grade phosphate deposit somewhere doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to refine it and be able to exploit it. There's a lot of phosphate that's found in seabeds, for instance, and it's still there. And there's been talk of dredging those, but gosh, that'd be a pretty horrible thing to do these days. Or there's a lot of phosphate that's found in kind of swampy areas, so it's hard to get to. Or there's phosphate that's found in great areas, but it's really far from infrastructure. So it's like, how do you get it to port? How do you move it? It takes a lot of trucking, a big CO2 footprint, or so really you kind of got to look at two things when you're looking at phosphate. You got to look at the grade, but you also have to look at the infrastructure, right? So generally, phosphate is taken out of the ground, and sedimentary deposit is screened, and then it's sent through for purification into merchant grade phosphoric acid. But if you have igneous rock, it's a really interesting process. At least our process is as such. We take the igneous rock and we crush it. Our igneous rock is really interesting. It also has iron in it and titanium. So what we do is we have a solventless process. We're trying to stay as environmentally friendly as possible. So we crush that rock down to a fine powder, and then basically what we do is with low intensity magnetics, we pull out the iron because iron's very magnetic. So the iron comes out, and then after that we pull out the the titanium through a gravity separation method and also with the higher magnetics. And then you're left with, an apatite. Apatite is a host mineral for the phosphate. So we float that, we emulsify that, we float that up. And then, we get to an apatite that needs to be dried. And then it's, like I said, it's at pretty high purity. That's at about 40.25%. It's the highest that you can get. So that's the process for igneous rock. The process for sedimentary rock is more of a screening process. It's all different around the world because these deposits are very different amongst themselves, especially in the sedimentary world. You have to think of it almost like, seabed that has accumulated over the years. It could have all kinds of different characteristics depending on, the age or the region of the world and how it actually accumulated.
So there's a lot of policy being implemented around the world, Canada, the EU, the US, a lot of other countries surrounding critical minerals and their extraction and government support going behind that. So I'm just wondering if, for example, in Canada, is phosphate considered a critical mineral? Do you see government support incoming? If it's not currently categorized as one, do you see that changing up ahead? What's the status there?
Yeah, so another very good question, and if we have our way, of course. But right now, it's, at the European Union level, it is deemed, I believe, a critical, and I'm not sure if they have it down as strategic mineral. It's also, in the province of Ontario, it's deemed as a critical mineral. It's like that in some other countries, I believe Korea, but for the moment, at the Canadian level and also at the U.S. level and also the Quebec level where we operate, it is not a critical mineral yet. We've been working very hard with various entities in Quebec to get that, and I'm very hopeful that that should be coming about shortly. I mean, if you look through our press releases, even some of the partners that we're working with in the region, we've just been given major project status by the regions, the two regions in Quebec that we work out of, and they've written in a letter as well on our behalf, and we have a number of parties that are really interested because you see in Quebec, not only do we have phosphate, but we got this really rare form of igneous phosphate. It's so special. It really doesn't make sense that it's not on the critical minerals list. But like everything, it takes time. The bureaucrats are looking at it. They have a lot of requests. So I'm quite hopeful that, this will all come into place rather quickly.
Well, let's shift focus specifically to First Phosphate now. I think that's a good segue. You've given us some hints as to the operations of the company, but maybe for those who aren't familiar, give us the broad overview of First Phosphate.
Yeah, so First Phosphate is the only company, as far as we know, in the world that's fully dedicated to extracting and purifying phosphate, but specifically for the lithium iron phosphate battery industry. We have no interest in fertilizer. We're looking to create technological material, and we're looking to vertically integrate from the mine source all the way to the production of LFP cathode active material, that is powder, that goes into the cathode of the battery. So we have a very specific focus and we have a very specific pipeline, and we're trying to capture the upstream and the midstream and prepare ourselves for integration into the more downstream processes of the auto manufacturers and large-scale energy storage providers.
And you spoke about Quebec igneous rock phosphate a little bit. Could you maybe touch on some more details about why it is such a higher grade than other phosphate materials and what makes it so special?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Obviously, the university in the area, University of Chicoutimi and Queen's University, also for us, have been doing a lot of studies on why, what happened. So what it seems like the geology is that as these minerals were precipitating in the lava millions of years ago and the lava was cooling, it seems like they all kind of settled at different densities. So it seems like the phosphate is settled within the lava rock at a different density, and so that's how it sort of auto screened itself or auto purified itself. So we've done a lot of mineralogy so far, and we have almost zero trace elements, zero cadmium, uranium, thorium, like very low parts per million, which is astounding when you compare it to some of the other sedimentary phosphates. So this is really important because what it means is when you purify to merchant grade phosphoric acid and then to purified phosphoric acid, generally for every 1 ton of merchant grade phosphoric acid that you create 5 tons of gypsum, calcium sulfate, and that's where all the impurities lay inside of it. So when you're doing that with sedimentary deposit, that gypsum is full of radioactivity, like till the end of time kind of thing, and it's just piled up in big piles, and it creates a lot of problems, especially in some of the areas of the southern United States. But with igneous rock, what's amazing is that there's no impurities in that gypsum, so you can almost use it to make plaster. There's a big German company that will take all of that, turn it into plaster, fully recycle it, a full circular economy. You don't have these big eyesores of gypsum piles, and you don't have all the potential contamination of groundwater that comes around with it. So that's the special beauty of igneous rock, volcanic rock from Quebec, is that it makes a high amount of purified phosphoric acid. And it doesn't leave the big gypsum slag piles, and it allows you to do circular economy. We recently had our deposit sort of graded by Queen's University in Canada, saying that probably the deposit can become an ESG source of phosphate, and that's really important, Jesse, because there's no other ESG driven phosphate deposit in the world that I know of. They actually have a lot of issues that they're trying to diligently work on.
So could you give us some more details about your assets, the different properties and their main attributes?
Yeah, so we have about 1,500 square kilometers of claims across this igneous anorthos site in Quebec. We feel that we have sort of locked up all the claims within 300 kilometers of the deep sea port of Saguenay. It was really important for us to have full control over all the phosphate showings in the area. So we did a diligent job of purchasing claims, doing magnetic surveying, and working with local prospectors. So we have a large amount of claims, but we have two properties that are the most advanced. So we have a property called Lac L'Orignal. It's sitting at 140 kilometers from the deep sea port of Saguenay. It's got a 43101 resource of 49 million tons in the ground. There's more drilling that can be done, and we're now moving that property into preliminary economic evaluation. And we hope to have that out by the end of the year. That property is really interesting because you can get down to the deep sea port with one easy truck haul, less than 2.5 to 3 hours. Standard trucks, they can go on all the roads. The roads are right to the property. The roads are logging roads that are open all year round. And then when we get to the deep sea port gets us out to our partners in Europe without any locks, right? And 365 days a year. Now we did surface sampling on all the other properties that we had tied up, and wouldn't you believe that at 75 kilometers from the port, so almost half of the other property, we found phosphate indications that almost double of what we found in the first property, that's Bégin-La-Marche. We've done about 4,200 meters of drilling on there. We're finding exceptional results. And it's in an area where it's very accessible to the port, and with the grades, and it's very near infrastructure, near population that is really willing to work and really wants to have the mine in the area. So it's looking very, very positive on all those levels as well. So two main properties for us at the moment.
And could you fill us in on any recent or upcoming news flow about the company that you think investors should be paying attention to?
Yeah, so obviously we're a public company, Jesse, so I can only say what's already out there in the press. So we have indicated that we're working on our beneficiation pilot plant. What that means is, as I was talking to you before, when you take the ore out of the ground and you concentrate it, right? We were able to get that to 40.25% purity. So right now we're in the process of building a pilot plant around that, because that mineralogy was just done recently. So now the next step is a pilot plant. We're building a pilot plant. We're building a large bulk sample of that phosphate concentrate, and we'll be sending it to our partners in Belgium, Prayon Technologies, to process that into purified phosphoric acid. And then from there, we'll probably be sending it out to a few of our other partners in the in the LFP battery space, who will use that purified phosphoric acid for making LFP cathode active material. So what we're looking to do there, Jesse, is sort of complete the whole supply chain. So, sort of in small and in theory, so that we can get from ore all the way to LFP cathode active material. And then after that's proven out on small scale, obviously, gives us the ability to move into bigger scale. So that's number one. Number two, we're going to continue drilling at that new property, Bégin-La-Marche, because we have exceptional results there. And number three, we're going to continue to move Lac L'Orignal into PEA this year.
Well, John, thank you so much for joining us today. Phosphate, once again, a commodity that is not often discussed, but seems like a really vital one. So we really appreciate you coming on and sharing your knowledge about both the commodity and First Phosphate with the viewers.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. It's been great. I look forward to coming back sometime and letting you know how everything develops.
Commodity Culture is a series on commodities and natural resources. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you're always up to date with the latest episodes.